Well, let's bring you more now on the Court of Appeal challenge to the ban on assisted suicide. It's being mounted today by 68-year-old motor neurone disease sufferer Noel Conway. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by Dr. Peter Saunders, Campaign Director for Care Not Killing, and Andrew Copson, Chief Executive of the British Humanist Society. And Dr. Peter Saunders, to you first of all. Noel Conway told the court that he wants a peaceful and dignified end to his life. Who are we to stop him?
Well, I have a lot of sympathy with where he's coming from and understand why he wants to do it. But the key issue here is that he's arguing that the ban on assisted suicide interferes with his right to private and family life under the Human Rights Act. But this right is not absolute in a democratic society, but it has to be balanced against the rights and the freedoms of others. And that's the key issue, that it is really impossible to pass a law which will keep vulnerable people safe. And Parliament's looked at this at least 10 times in Britain already, and every time has defeated it, most recently by an overwhelming majority. And that's because of the fear that if the law were to change, vulnerable people, those who are elderly, sick or depressed or disabled, would feel under pressure to end their lives so as not to be a burden on family or friends or caregivers. And the evidence from other jurisdictions like Oregon and Washington, the Netherlands and Belgium, which have had a long run with this kind of legislation, demonstrates that there is collateral damage and that vulnerable people, those who have no voice, unlike Noel Conway, are at danger of losing their lives by those who would want to exploit or abuse them.
Well, let's put those points to Andrew Copson from the British Humanist Association. And that is a valid point, isn't it? That in Noel Conway's case, he's a man who's clearly has his mental faculties. He's doing it for he believes all the right reasons. But what if this were to become enshrined in law and others could then be made vulnerable because of it?
It's certainly the case that any legalisation of assisted dying would need to come with strong safeguards. It's very important that people who are requesting assisted dying and who receive it under any future law are of sound mind. It's very important that their decision is uncoerced. Actually, family members often try and persuade people who want assisted dying to live and to stay rather than the other way around, as some people cynically assume. But with those safeguards, it's also important that we do move towards a law, a legal situation that gives people like Noel and many, many more people that we all know, probably today in our own families and friends and maybe even ourselves, who want, when the time comes, to be given the choice and the dignity of an assisted death. And what we're talking about, after all, is something that is incredibly individual. We're all going to die, right? That's a universal experience. But our individual circumstances when we approach that time are all going to be very different. What could be more personal? Over what area of our existences could we need more choice than this? And at the moment, a very large number of people are denied that choice. And this is a new issue, right? Medicine keeps us alive now for longer than has ever been possible in the history of human beings. And with that new wonderful situation that allows us to live, if we want to, for as long as possible, we have new problems, which is that some people, like Noel, find after due consideration that their life is no longer livable and they want assistance to die with dignity. Well, I think the same medicine that provides us with exceptionally long life should provide us with the assistance to end that life with dignity.
Dr. Saunders, since 1961, suicide has been legal in the UK. Essentially, aren't you depriving people who are too sick to be able to actually carry this out the opportunity to do something which, were they more able-bodied, they would be able to do legally?
Well, you're quite right. It's not against the law to commit suicide, but it is against the law to help someone to commit suicide, and that's because the law recognises the place of subtle coercion or perhaps even just a sense of duty. The problem is that the so-called right to die can so easily become the duty to die, and people do feel under pressure. And we've just seen in other jurisdictions that you can't control it. So if we look at the divisional court judgment, the divisional court last year threw this case out, and they concluded that what would inevitably happen was that there would be an expansion of categories of people to be included in the case. And we see that as I say, in the Netherlands and Belgium, in Oregon and Washington, which are often touted as the example. Over 50%, more than half in both of those jurisdictions, cite fear of being a burden as one of the reasons that they're asking for assisted suicide for. And the other reasons are reasons like autonomy or loss of meaning in life and so on. So we also have to put this in context that there are, it's incredibly rare, even with people like Conway, to want to go down this route. There are 5,000 people in Britain with motor neuron disease. 3 of them die every day. Virtually none of them want this. And the reason for that is because with good palliative care, which addresses people's physical, emotional, social and spiritual needs as well, requests to die are incredibly rare. And the key question is, do you change the law for a very small number of determined people? And our answer has always been no, because the collateral damage to others would be too great. We all accept that in a democratic society there are limits to human freedom in order to keep vulnerable people safe, and this is one such case, and that's certainly been the conclusion.
Let's give Andrew Copson a chance to respond. You were shaking your head vigorously there, but just one point I wanted to pick up was that you were talking about how relatives very often discourage people from doing this, and that's a fair point, isn't it? But what about the people who are doing it for themselves? They feel they don't want to be a burden. Their relatives aren't saying, please bump yourself off. They are saying, I don't want to see my wife, I don't want to see my children having to bathe me, having to do these things. I'm doing it because I love them so much, I don't want them to go through it.
And, I mean, the assumption behind your question is that that should be seen as an invalid reason. I think that if everyone who might want an assisted death will have a complex range of reasons. People don't do things for one reason. We're more complicated than that. A slow loss of dignity, an unwillingness to be dependent on other people. I mean, I think about this quite often when I think about both my grandparents, who recently died in the last couple of years. And, my grandfather was very happy to be dependent on other people. He was very happy to have every aspect of personal care, quite intimate care provided for him, to feel, in a sense, that he was a burden on them. He thought that was perfectly justifiable, that he should be a burden on them. My grandmother, by contrast, it was one of the worst possible things for her sense of self that she could have conceived of, to be dependent on others or to be a burden on others. But I don't see why that reason and decision, just as many other reasons at the same time that they both had, and I'm sure all people who confront this difficult choice have, I don't see why that shouldn't be one valid reason among others. I mean, if that's part of your intrinsic to your sense of self and the whole way that you've lived your life, maybe, for others or for the benefit of your children, then why shouldn't that be part of a very complicated range of reasons as you approach the end of your life, to want to have assistance to die with dignity? I don't understand. It's not on Peter or on others of us to judge and question and sit in judgment on the reasons that people make their choices in the most intimate and personal situation. I think that people's reasons are people's reasons, and my decision is to respect those reasons. There should be never any coercion, and if there has been any coercion in other jurisdictions, which I doubt the scale of. I think that's a misrepresentation of other jurisdictions. But if there has been, then we can learn from those jurisdictions when we introduce a more humane and perhaps more sophisticated law in the UK. It's not beyond our wit to do better than other countries in many areas of our life, and maybe this law would be one of them.
It is deeply personal, isn't it? A fascinating discussion. Good to speak to you both. Andrew Copson from the British Humanist Society Association and Dr. Peter Saunders from Care Not Killing. Thank you both very much.